2021. Okay, first thing we'll do is we'll have the city clerk. Ashley, could you please call roll?
Yes. Councilmember Anderson,
Here.
Councilmember Lauren,
Here.
Councilmember New,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Biasi,
Here.
and Mayor Cowan.
Here. Okay, next we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember New, would you be so kind as to lead us
Certainly.
in the pledge?
Thank you. On the count of three. 1, 2, 3. I pledge
allegiance to the
to
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to approval of the agenda. Is there any changes or alterations needed to the agenda?
There are none.
Okay,
Move
Hearing
for
none.
approval.
okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilmember New and a second by Councilmember Lauren for approval of the agenda. Ashley, will you do roll call vote, please?
Yes. Councilmember Anderson,
Aye.
Councilmember Lauren,
Aye.
Councilmember New,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Biasi,
Aye.
and Mayor Cowan.
Aye, motion carries unanimously. Okay, now we're going to move on to the council staff and comments, and we will start with Councilmember Lauren.
Hey, good evening. Glad to see everybody. I have a couple comments and I guess 3 newsworthy items. On January 8th, I chaired the Yolo County Transportation District meeting. On February 10th, I participated in a Valley Clean Energy Subcommittee meeting on possible future assembly bills and Senate bills that could benefit Valley Clean Energy. On February 11th, I attended a very long League of California Cities board meeting that bled into the 4 o'clock Valley Clean Energy meeting. On February 12th, the League of California Cities board meeting continued. And I have a couple announcements on that I'm saving for the end of this. On February 15th, I met with City Manager Kathleen Treppa to review tonight's agenda. And then here's my brief announcements. On Friday, Sac Valley Division is hosting a division meeting in West Sac. It'll be on Zoom, and I'm hoping my fellow council members can attend. It's at 1. And then Cal Cities has an announcement on funding. In good news from DC, Friday night, the U.S. House Government and Oversight Committee passed out of its committee a critical component of the President's American Rescue Plan, a bill calling for $350 billion in aid for states and local governments. And under this package, it's a top priority. As you recall, no money has been allocated to cities in the past. So this would be really helpful for the city of Winters. And also during the league board meeting, there was announced that Cal Cities will be having an Advancing Equity Advisory Committee. And for an organization that's over 125 years old, it's really groundbreaking to have an Equity Advisory Committee. And I look forward to working on it. I've been selected for the committee. Those are my announcements. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. I have some Zoom reports to present on Thursday, February 11th. I attended the Lower Pewter Creek Coordinating Committee meeting. That was a Zoom meeting. On February 15th, I had a Zoom meeting reviewing tonight's agenda with City Manager Kathleen Trump.
Okay,
Kathleen
you.
Treppa, excuse me.
right. Okay, thank you. Councilmember New.
Thank you. On February 4th, Thursday, I attended I actually Zoomed the Land Use and Natural Resources Committee for SACOG. And this is the time that we're talking a lot about housing, and that housing meeting is going to go over to our meeting, which is the 18th of this month, and we're discussing housing and how it relates to economic equality, and we have a lot going on with that. On the 5th, on Friday the 5th, I attended the Winners Senior Center Equipment and Facilities meeting. As always, that was quite a lively meeting, and they're really working hard getting ready to start raising that money. The 10th, Wednesday, I attended the Yolo County Housing meeting, looking at what's coming up. Everybody's focusing on our RENA numbers and what we are going to come up with. The 12th, Friday, I attended city county 2x2 meeting along with our mayor, and most of it was report from Supervisor Saylor about what has been going on in the COVID thing, and that was that. After that, there was also another meeting of the Winners Senior Center Equipment group, and then there was a meeting on the 16th. I met with our city manager, Kathleen. Thank you, Trepa. That's
Okay,
it.
thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Biazzi.
Thank you, Mayor. On February 4th and February 11th, I attended the staff meetings for the management team of the city. And all the meetings that I attended were all Zoom meetings, so I won't say that for every meeting. It's all Zoom. On the 12th, I attended the Chamber Board planning meeting. They have a number of things going on, that events they'll be doing this year to try to make up for revenues that they don't have coming in due to COVID, and no events being held downtown, which is where the chamber makes a lot of their operating expenses, paying for salary, that type of thing. So they have a raffle going around right now, and if you'd like to buy tickets, they're available through the chamber office. So they have a number of other events coming up this year to try to raise money. On the 15th, I had the agenda review with the city manager. And earlier this afternoon, I attended the design review committee meeting along with the mayor and several other city officials to review the farmstead development project. And that's all I have to report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All my meetings were also Zoom meetings, and on the 4th, I attended one for the Homelessness Commission. On the 10th, the Senior Commission. On the 11th, Valley Clean Energy Board. On the 12th, the 2x2 with the county, as mentioned by Councilmember New. And as mentioned by Mayor Pro Tem, I was also on the DRC meeting for the possible upcoming farmstead project this afternoon. I've also had a couple of calls with the city manager regarding tonight's agenda and other items. Okay, thank you everybody for all your work on the extra committees and assignments. And now we're going to move on to public comment. And at this time, any member of the public can address the city council on matters which are not listed on tonight's agenda. And so if anybody would like to speak on an issue that is not on the agenda, this is your opportunity. And I know the city clerk, Ashley, you mentioned that you already have one person lined up for that.
I do. Eleanor, who is on as Eli, had something she wanted to bring to council tonight. And I
Can you
actually
hear
Okay.
me?
I'll share.
Yes,
I'm sorry, but I'm having trouble with my Zoom. Can you hear me?
yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great, great. Thank you for taking a minute to listen to my comments. So I'm coming here today after months of planning with your contract planner. And I have to decide where to settle after the fires last year. I'm in escrow for the purchase of 100 Wolfskill Street and plan to build a small house. The reason I'm addressing yourselves, the stewards of the common good, is to initiate a written article that clearly outlines the terms of the storm drain maintenance and liability. As a title holder, this could be a problem, but not one that cannot be solved. I want to live here because of my pioneer roots in the region and how Winters is a vibrant and unique community. I need the southern exposure, the utility hookups, and the broadband, all essential for a productive life. The site map that I sent to you has one error because First Street actually lies within the master plan area. I've spoken with Public Works and have received the photos of the excavation work done a few years ago when the storm drain had broken and they fixed it. The question is, what will that responsibility remain with the city as the easement holder? So I'm sorry to bring this up in such a way, and I know you don't have answers and I don't expect that, but if I could just introduce the option of having you take a look at this, because I have to decide whether or not I can move forward. Thank you.
Okay, you're quite welcome, and thanks for bringing this to our attention. If there's one thing I know for certain, it's pretty much everybody at the city would like to see that little old house gone and something nice put up there. So welcome. And
Thank you so much.
I'm sure staff will continue to work on some solutions with you. So thank you. Ashley,
Okay.
do we have anybody else for public comment?
I am not seeing anybody with their hands up at this time.
Okay, thank you. Then we will move on to the consent calendar. Kathleen?
There is only one item on the consent calendar, and it is the minutes of the regular meeting held on Tuesday, February 2nd.
Okay, if there's no questions or concerns, we'd entertain a motion for the consent calendar.
Like to
So
move the
moved.
consent calendar.
Okay, well, we got two motions, so I think it was kind of a tie. So we'll give this one to Bill this time. We got a motion from Mayor Pro Tem Biazzi and a second from Councilmember Lauren for approval of the consent calendar. Ashley, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Anderson,
Aye.
Councilmember Lauren,
Aye.
Councilmember New,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Biasi,
Aye.
and Mayor Cowan.
Aye, motion carries unanimously. Okay, moving on. We don't have any presentations tonight. We do have a few discussion items. And I just want to mention that we think we're going to have quite a few comments tonight, especially on the last item. So to keep this from being a Davis meeting that goes to a new calendar day, we will be operating off of our 3-minute clock. And if you have comments that are similar to somebody else's, feel free to say, I agree with that person. And, you know, maybe be a little shorter, but we do want to hear what everybody's thoughts are. Okay, the first item up is the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, referred to as the CAFR. And I'm sure our financial director, Shelley Gumby, will kind of give us a little rundown on this.
mission to us is to tell everyone the good.
Right. Good evening, City Council and staff. The item before you tonight is our comprehensive annual financial report. Each one of you should have received a hard copy of that report in your box, but included on the slide on the table on the tablet, computer, whatever before you is also the on our website where you can access the actual report itself. Our report was prepared by Van Lant and Thankenau for the 1920 fiscal year, and it contains a lot of information about the economic conditions that we faced during the 1920 fiscal year. It contains a management discussion and analysis that is prepared by staff that again highlights some of the financial information for the year. It gives you a guide to the financial statements. It talks about the government-wide financial statements and government activities. And then on page 26 of the balance of the report is the governmental funds balance sheet. Let's see if I can figure out how I'm doing my PowerPoint now. And that table I've blown up into the PowerPoint just for ease because I know it is small and I know not everybody had access to it. When we prepared the budget at the end of the fiscal year last year, we had predicted a $491,000 deficit. That is expenses in excess of revenues for the first two items, which is the general fund and the community development department, which make up the general fund. Our actual expenditures in excess of revenues was $339,000. So we actually did better than what my projections were for the year. However, we still had to use our savings account in order to pay all of our expenditures for the last fiscal year. The reason that we had these expenditures in excess of revenues is because our sales tax went down when we basically had to shut down in March for the COVID-19 pandemic. That did away with a lot of our revenue sources. People were staying home, they weren't buying gas, the restaurants were closed. And as we've all learned, about 64% of our sales tax comes from gas and restaurants. And we've talked about that a lot in this last year, so that number shouldn't be surprising to anybody. We also ended up having our hotel and the Abbey House Inn shut down during that time period. And so we had budgeted about $213,000 in TOT for the year. And we did not collect that. We only collected about $41,000 of that. We had a lot of other revenue reductions that were just impacts of not having people going about their business and doing everything that they normally do. So if you look at the financial report, if you look at the CAFR, it says that revenue in excess of expenditures for the general fund was $364,605. The general fund is made up of a lot of different funds, and I've listed them for you because these are not funds that are restricted in use by course of law, but we've restricted their use by how we want to look at them. We set money aside for the general plan, for the general fund, capital equipment replacement fund. We set funds aside for the service reserve fund. We track things like the community garden and the general fund capital and the canine program, because we want to be able to say this is the money we've set aside for that. But for all intents and purposes, the city council and city staff have determined that these are items that are reserved, not course of law. So when we put them into our financial statements, they are considered general fund. But when we talk about general fund for us, and when we talk about the general fund for our budget, we're looking at the top two items, the general fund and the community development department, because that's where the bulk of our discretionary funds go. And it's where the bulk of our staffing and our costs are. That's where the police department is. It's where the fire department is. It's where the building and planning departments are. So when we talk about it, as we look at the budget and as we look at other financial statements that I give you, those are what we talk about as the general fund. When we look at our budget, we consider all the rest of these to be either special revenue funds or capital funds, depending on how we have classified them as an agency. So a couple of other things to talk about, and there's a lot of things to read. So if you guys have a chance and the public has a chance to go through and read this document, you have questions, you can always get in touch with me and I can answer those questions. But on note number 9 on page 53 through 55 talks about post-retirement insurance benefits. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later in tonight's meeting. There is an increase in the OPEB liability from the prior year. Note number 10 on pages 56 through 59 talk about our CalPERS defined benefits pension plan. And again, we're going to talk about some of that as well. Note that the information on the note 10 for CalPERS is for the year ended June 30th, 2017, because that's how far behind CalPERS is for getting us all the information. We also have our special revenue funds. Page 70 through 87 shows a lot of information about that. We also have our business type funds. That's our water and sewer funds. They're funded, instead of being funded by taxes, they're funded by user fees. And then starting on page 119, we have the statistical section that compares results for the prior 10 years. So it gives you a pretty good picture if you want to look at each one of the different statistical sections that we have. We've got the changes in our government tax revenues on page 130. We have on page 120 and 121, change in net position. The business type funds, again, are the water and sewer that are run more like businesses. Page 132 includes information on assessed values for the last 10 years, and you can clearly see where the recession was and how we've been working our way back out of that with our assessed values. So there's just a ton of information here for everybody to look at. And again, I guess the good news is that we didn't spend as much money in excessive revenues as we had originally projected when we were talking about this in May and June, which is a good thing. And that means staff was careful and some of our revenues came in a little bit better than what we had estimated. So at this point, if you have any questions or concerns, I'm open.
Okay, is there any questions from council? Anybody? I just have one kind of point of clarification, Shelley, and that is this report and what we're looking at here in these numbers and this amount of deficit that is mostly COVID related. It only covers the period from March until July, correct?
No, this is
for the fiscal year, or is this a calendar year?
This is the fiscal year of July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020. So it contains the part of the year when things were still quote unquote normal, but it also includes that last 3.5-4 months when everything was shut down and nobody was able to do much of anything economically.
But it does not include the second half of 2020, which has also been slow and without a lot of funds, because that's part of the 2021 budget. So, okay. That's what I thought. No questions from any other council members?
I'll just make a quick comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I just wanted to say, I mean, the good news is in it that we projected we were going to have to spend, what, 491,000 was our projected deficit, and it was much lower than that. The bad news is that, we still had to spend money out of our general fund reserves well over $300,000. So there's obviously still areas we have to make some changes for long term, because we can't keep spending our reserves down or we won't have anything left.
Exactly. Yes.
That is correct. Ashley, do we have any public comment?
I had a
If you'd
comment.
like to make a comment, you can raise your hand. There's a raise your hand icon.
Councilmember Lauren had a comment before we
Okay,
move on.
go ahead, Councilmember Lauren.
Yeah, I have a question for Shelley, and referring back to the deficit after the recession, or where we ended up financially after the recession. Is it in your opinion that we fully rebounded from that recession?
Before COVID, yes, we had fully rebounded. Our assessed values are now higher than they were in 2009. But we've taken a little bit of a step back because we lost ground on our sales tax. We were recovering. But yes, our revenues are higher than they were during the recession, and we are headed in the right direction if we can get through COVID and get our economic engine moving again, which is our downtown, where people can come and participate, and we can get our downtown being as active as it was prior to being shut down for COVID-19.
And just my follow-up question on that, do you see any structural deficit in how we operate?
Currently, we do have a structural deficit right now. We are doing a lot of our budget balancing based on building permits that are being issued. And as everybody in town is fairly aware, we have quite a bit of building going on out in the subdivisions. And so we are using one-time revenues to help us balance our budgets. So that would be where I would find, and currently this year's budget was created to be was balanced when it was completed. And we've made some adjustments this year also, which the budget remains balanced, but we are using one-time funds to balance that budget. And so, yes, we do have a structural deficit that we need to fill that one-time revenue source with reoccurring revenue sources so that we're not dependent on that one-time revenue source from year to year.
And I just want to say I should have started out with this. I am so pleased that you are part of the City of Winners, and that you have won an award for your work every year. I don't know how many years. Is it 15?
I think it was our 14th or 15th. Yes.
And I'm just awed by your work. So thank you very much. And thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you.
Okay, Ashley, did we have any hands up?
I did see Jennifer R with her hand up.
Okay,
Can
can we unmute Jennifer?
Jennifer will have to unmute.
Oh, yeah, I had lowered it because I guess it was less a comment and just more of it was going to be a question, but I realized that, but I'll just throw it out there since you called on me. I was just commenting on the fact that obviously we have the federal bill, the new COVID relief bill has money for local government, supposedly, included in it if it passes over the course of the next month or two. So there might be a chance to backfill. I don't know if that's the case or not, what monies we could get access to, but there could be some reimbursements for local governments included in that. I just don't know where we would fall on the, in those applications and what that looks like.
We can hope. We're usually at the bottom of the food chain, but we can hope. That's for sure. Do we have anybody else that would like to comment on this item?
I have one more question, Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Shelley, if I remember, in some of the reports we get from the HDL that does our sales tax and property tax projections, if I recall, I think they were saying it may not be until 2025 until we actually recover to our past levels of sales tax revenues. Is that right?
Yeah, they predicted that it could be 4 to 5 years, depending on what businesses managed to hold on throughout the recession and what businesses have just given up and gone away. So their prediction was 4 to 5 years before we recovered back to our prior source. Now I do know that gas prices are going up now. And again, while that's not wonderful news, that increases our sales tax revenues as well. So what we really need to help get our reoccurring revenue sources moving is we need everybody back at work. We need everybody having the ability and the wherewithal to be able to participate in the economic engine that we have in our community, whether it's gas, whether it's food, whether it's going to the other businesses, the barber shops and the nail salons and the farmers market and all of those, or the farmers closet, all those little retail shops that are downtown right now. We need people to have the ability to be able to go out and spend money. And so that means we need to be able to recover. We need to get people traveling again. We need people to be able to go out and socialize again. And so until we're able to get back to some sense of normal, and that also includes getting people in our hotels and being able to have weddings and all of those things that drive our economic engine here. It's going to take a little while for all of that to recover. And yes, HDL did say it would be about 4 to 5 years.
Thank you. And we appreciate all your work putting this together. I know it's a huge job putting this report together every year. There's a lot of information there. So thank you very much for your work.
Thank you.
Okay, one last chance, Ashley. Anybody else want to comment on this item?
I am not seeing anybody with their hand up.
Okay, then we'll go ahead and move on. And as already mentioned, Shelley, thank you very much. We know this is a lot of work and you put a lot into it and you always do us proud and win awards for it. So good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to the second discussion item, which is the City of Winter's Treasurer Report for December of 2020. And Shelley, you're back up again.
Hi. So we were going to come back and talk a little bit more often about what our financial situation was for the fiscal year. And unfortunately, things happened in the fall that made getting everything done in a more timely manner not happen. So I've done the December 2020 financial treasurer report. And right now, general fund revenues are 27% of the budgeted amount. Last year at the same time, it was 28% of budgeted amount. So we're pretty much where we generally are at the end of December. The first installment payment for property tax was received in January 2021, and it was like the last week of January. I did a cursory review. It looks like we're going to be very close to what our projected revenues are, maybe even a little bit higher in the property tax area. I will say that last year was the first year that we had hired HDL's property tax division to help us with our property tax, figuring out where we thought it was going to go. They have staff that tracks all these new homes that are coming on and the timing and when they're going to hit the rolls and things like that. So they were able to give us a much more accurate projection than we've been able to do on our own, because they have the time and the ability to dig down into those numbers and come up with them. The VLF was also received late in January, is not included on this report. So the property tax isn't included. The VLF is not included. However, it looks like that's going to be about $32,000 higher than what we projected in the budget, which will be helpful. Sales and use taxes are remitted about 2 months after they're received. And this is one of our big unknowns. So we've received about 26% of the revenues. I've been pushing HDL to have a meeting so that we can kind of see where we're going. It looks like our sales tax are going to come in almost, if everything keeps going the way it has been going. Our budget, our projections are pretty good. We should come in very, very close to what our revenues were projected to be. Our utility user tax it comes in 1 to 3 months after the utilities are used. We get a lot of our revenues in October, January, April, and July. And right now we're at 48% of our budget. So pretty close. We're 50% through the year and we've got 48% of the budgeted amount. Our building permit fees, we've received 83%. The building permits have been being pulled significantly faster than what we had projected. And as I talked with earlier, when Councilmember Lauren asked the question, these are one-time revenues. So what happens is we have the revenue for the building permit. Once the house is built, it goes on the assessed roll and it turns into property tax revenue. But we get about 26% of 1% of the value of the house. So if somebody collects, let's just round it up and make it easy. If somebody pays a $5,000 property tax bill, we might get $1,000 of it. So that's the perspective, is as it comes out of your pocket, it does not all come back to the city. And generally a building permit runs about $20,000 or so, give or take, with all of the other fees. So we're not quite making all of that up when we convert it into a reoccurring revenue source. But HDL did send me my new projections for the new budget, and it did make a significant impact on that reoccurring revenue source. So that will be helpful as we start working to address our budget shortfalls. Our general fund expenditures are 61% of budgeted, but we need to keep in mind that we prepay our CalPERS unfunded liabilities at the beginning of the year because it saves us 7% in interest. And so the full 12 months worth of payments is already in our expenditures. We also pay 100% of our liability and other insurances at the beginning of the year. So we've got 12 months worth of those two expenditures in particular preloaded into half of the year. So that I'm not concerned that we're a little over at this point. Also, we did have some changes in personnel and there were some additional costs. You know, we all know that John left, and so there were some additional costs in his termination. The citywide assessment district, which is our parks and street lighting, is coming in pretty close to what we projected. Our water fund, we have 57% of our revenues in compared to projections, and we're at 48% of the budget has been expended. And the sewer fund, 42% of our revenues have been, 52% of our revenues have been received compared to what we budgeted, and the expenditures are at 53% of budget. And again, they too have some preloaded CalPERS and insurance costs in there because that cost gets allocated out throughout the city to the different funds. There's really no fiscal impact from this report. The one that I provide you, hopefully early next month, will have, excuse me, will have all of the funding from Yolo County included in it, and it'll give us a little bit better picture of where our revenues are headed once I've made that and done some more calculation. So I'm open for any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions from council for Shelley on the treasurer's report? Can't see quite everybody, but I'm not hearing anybody.
I've got
It
one.
looks like
Mayor,
Taylor,
please.
I think you got your hand up from the Winners Express. Go ahead.
Yes, Taylor Bealey. I'm here in my personal capacity, 210 Ammon Street. Shelley, I had a question regarding the TOT revenue. I know that that's one of those time-lagged revenue sources. I believe that the amount that we bank is basically, it's not the same necessarily, even the same calendar year that it was incurred. Can you tell me I think you said $41,000 generated through the fiscal year through June. When would those have been like when would people have been staying in the hotel for those monies to show up? Does that include how long of the hotel's opening, would you say?
So that would have been from July 1st. I don't think they opened until September. So basically from September through December is when we have actually collected TOT. We passed an urgency ordinance that allowed them to defer their TOT payments, and they will be having to get those caught up by June 30th. But they were mostly closed through March, or from March through June. So it just wasn't going to, it's never going to be what we projected for last year, even after we get opened back up. There's still going to be some shortfalls in there just due to all the restrictions that have been put in place for COVID.
Okay, is there any other public comment on this item? Ashley, do we have any other hands up?
I am not seeing any other hands at this time.
Okay, if there's no further comment or questions from the council, this was another informational item just to let everybody know where we're at and what's going on with the finances. And we're going to move on to the third item now, which is very similar in nature. We're going to talk a little bit about the unfunded employee benefit liabilities, which is always a fun topic. So once again, Shelley, you're the star.
Let me find it. There it is. Okay, so one of the things that we're trying to do is be very transparent with our unfunded employee benefit liabilities. City of Winters basically has 3 unfunded liabilities. One of those is unused leave balances. Vacation, comp time are the 2 most common ones. There are a few others, but not really in Winters. Also, we have our unfunded liability for the minimum amount of the health insurance. When an employee retires from the City of Winters, they're allowed to stay on the City of Winters or stay in CalPERS and keep their CalPERS health insurance. The employee is required to pay all but the minimum amount that's required by law. And right now, I think that's $143 per person per month. So the city pays $143 per person per month. The employee must pay the rest of it. But that $143 per person per month creates an unfunded liability for the city. There's a lot of information in the CAFR, which is why I brought it up in the CAFR earlier, and you can go through it and you can look at the post-employment benefits, and there's a lot of numbers in there. They are actuarially determined, which means we have to hire somebody to do that because actuaries are very specialized folks. And then the third one, and for the City of Winters, the most pressing one, is our unfunded liability for CalPERS. CalPERS is the retirement system that all City of Winters employees participate in. All full-time City of Winters employees. We have 7 retirement plans for our little city. I think we have like 45 people enrolled in 7 plans. And so this chart that I'm sharing right now shows the employer rate for each one of the plans, starting with police PEPRA and miscellaneous PEPRA. PEPRA is the Public Employee Retirement Act. And what it did was it reorganized where people could be in their plans. Anybody that was hired after January 1st, 2013, could no longer go into one of the classic plans. And what it did at that point was said that the employer and the employee basically paid the same amount of money for the retirement. And whereas in the classic plan for miscellaneous, the employee pays 7%, and for the safety folks, police and fire, they pay 9%. And so you can see the difference. If you look at a miscellaneous classic, the employer pays 11.31%, but me as a classic employee, I pay 7% versus looking at a police PEPRA person, they pay 13.044% out of their check, and the city pays 13.044 on their behalf. So an unfunded liability is the difference between the assets that are in the plan and what CalPERS determines is needed to be in the plan in order to pay all of the liabilities of the plan. And obviously the police PEPRA and the miscellaneous PEPRA are going to be the most well-funded. They're the newest. They have people have been paying more funding to get into that. And they're doing a better, because they're new, they've just been doing a better job of performing. This shows the various amounts for 2021. The city pays 13.044% on every wage, every dollar that the employee makes. For police PEPRA, for miscellaneous, it's 7.732. For fire, it's classic, it's 18.152%. For fire PEPRA, it's the same as the police department, 13.044. For police classic tier 2, we have 2 different tiers in the police department. One is at 18.152%. The other one is at 20.59%. And the miscellaneous classic is 11.031%. CalPERS has already sent us documentation showing us where these percentages are expected to go. And it looks like they're going to be holding the percentages that we pay every year steady. But you can look at the liability payments for 2021, 21-22, and 22-23, which CalPERS has also provided to us. And you can see in particular the miscellaneous classic and the police classic first tier are going up significantly in 22-23. The unfunded liability for 6/30/19, I have this now because they sent this out in October. Our current estimated unfunded liability for 6/30/19 is $5.9 million. In 6/30/2018, it was $5.6 million. So it's gone up $322,000, which is about, I have a number. So it is approximately a 5.7% increase year over year. City Council has adopted some policies to help us. Oh, sorry, let me finish this. So it also shows the percent funded at the end of the year. And actually, compared to a lot of our neighboring agencies, our percent funded is pretty good. And these look like really huge numbers for us. But for our neighboring agencies, this is like nothing. And then it gives you, CalPERS also shows you how much you have to pay each year to get down to zero. And so if we look at the amortization in the 3 columns, you can see that if we take 30 years to pay this off, it's going to cost us $10.6 million. If we can cut that down by 10 years, that'll take us $9.5 million, a savings of almost a little over $1 million. If we can cut it down to a 15-year repayment period, it's $8.2 million, and that would save us $1.3 million. Now, City of Winters, City Council did adopt a policy for paying down both OPEB, which is the health insurance issue, and CalPERS. And we've actually already amended it once. And what it says is we're going to look at revenues in excess of expenditures, and we're going to set a certain amount aside and make additional discretionary payments. They're called ADPs. So if somebody talks to you about an ADP, it's an additional discretionary payment, because CalPERS loves to shorten things and use acronyms. So obviously, the general fund did not have any revenues in excess of expenditure, so it made no contributions to either of the two. However, the water fund and the sewer fund both met the revenue in excess of expenditures and the debt service goals as stated in our policy. And so we have made an additional discretionary payment to CalPERS of about $56,000 in the current fiscal year that is for the prior fiscal year. And the way we calculated doing it was we looked at it and we paid it off based on how much we did some math and worked with the actuarials to figure out the best way to apply it. And we are getting ready to make our first contribution into our Section 115 trust for the OPEB. It also will be about $56,000 because the way the policy reads is we take the revenues and excessive expenditures and 25% of it goes to CalPERS and 25% of it goes to OPEB, and then the other 50% goes back into fund balance so that we've got that savings account being built up. And so we did that in both water and sewer for this year. So we're putting about $112,000 into starting our policies and getting them going. Unfortunately, because we didn't have any excess revenues in the general fund, it didn't make any contributions this year. But I'm hoping as we get our structural deficit in place and we get our economic engine running and really perking along, that we're going to be able to start making those additional discretionary payments out of the general fund as well. And that will help start whittling down all of these big numbers that we're seeing on this sheet. So that was a lot of information and a lot of numbers that I've thrown out at you guys tonight. And I'm ready to answer any questions you might have, hopefully.
Okay, thank you, Shelley. Is there any questions from council on all this mass confusion of unfunded liability?
I have a question, Mayor.
Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem Biazzi.
Shelley, I know back in, I think it was 2016, according to the staff report, and CalPERS board voted to lower their discount rate from 7.5 to 7. So has there been any discussion on them changing that with, I'm sure they're probably basing this on their investments in the stock market, I believe, and with the economy doing what it's doing and stock market where it's at, is there any chance that they might change that, increase that discount rate?
So my understanding is they meet every 2 years to discuss their discount rate. And the last time I went to a conference, which because of COVID has been almost 2 years now, there were rumors that they were looking to go to about 6.75% as their discount rate, which is another 0.25%. But I haven't seen anything recently. And I know that they've been trying to diversify their portfolio a little bit more to see if they can come closer to getting that 7%. And that's one thing I didn't mention is our unfunded liability will never, even if we paid it all off today, at the end of the year, we would have an unfunded liability because there's so many things that impact it besides just us paying the bill. It does depend on how CalPERS investment strategy works compared to their assumed 7%. It also depends on the decisions that are made by the agency on payroll. They make certain assumptions that payroll is going to go up by so much money per year. If an agency gives higher raises than what CalPERS is predicted, then that's going to negatively impact the unfunded liability. If they give smaller raises, then it would positively impact it. So there's just, it's a whole, there's a whole litany of things that they go through to determine this. But yeah, there has been some talk about 7 not being as realistic as they had hoped.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other council questions? Ashley, do we have any public comment on the item?
Bear with me 1 second. I'm not seeing any hands up. I just want to make sure I go to all the pages. Okay, I'm not seeing any public comment at this time.
Okay, If there's no further comment or questions,
I
then
just have a clarifying question. So I'm wrestling with all this information, I bet, just like everybody else. So,
Yeah.
so, okay, so when we talk about the unfunded employee liability and we look at those numbers, it would be to our great benefit to be able to pay down the amortization 15-year. But
Mhm.
we're not in that place right now. And then bringing in the information from the last topic that we discussed, we were saying that it would take 4 to 5 years for us to recover to
Sales.
get our whole economic engine. So we might not be in a place to be paying the additional discretionary payments for some time.
That could be correct. The way the policy reads is if we have revenues in excess of expenditures, then we take 20 in the general fund, we would take 25%, make an additional discretionary payment, and we would take 25% and put it on the OPEB side. So what we need to do is we need to work really hard to find ways to fix our structural deficit. It's not quite the word I want, but to resolve the structural deficit that we have by replacing it with a reoccurring revenue source, and then make the decisions moving forward that will help us keep that structure so it doesn't have a deficit in it. Now, one of the things we had talked about prior to COVID-19 with the prior city manager was we had these 2 hotels coming on board. We knew we were going to get TOT, and there was a discussion before COVID hit of trying to take a portion of that, because we thought that would resolve our structural deficit, and then take a portion of that and set it aside for funding these unfunded liabilities. Of course, COVID hit, hotels aren't seeing the business that they were seeing before. The second hotel got slowed down and hasn't been completed and isn't open and generating revenues for the owners. So I think we still have a possibility of doing this with some of the economics that should start happening once we come out of the COVID environment. But what we have to realize is we're not quite sure what everyone's comfort level is going to be for doing all of these things that we need to have start happening for our economic engine to start percolating along again. Because we talked earlier about people have to have the ability to be able to afford to do the travel and the time out or the eating out and going to the hotels and coming through town for various, going up to the lake and all of that. Not only do they have to have the financial ability to do that, they have to feel confident that it's safe for them to do that as well for their health. And so I think that's why I think had COVID not hit, we would have been in a better place and more able to look more closely at these issues. And I do believe, yes, I think that it's going to take some time before we're able to address them in the manner that we want, which is why rather than going to CalPERS and saying, we want to cut this into a 15-year amortization basis, we've worked within the additional discretionary payment basis, because once you go to the 15-year basis with CalPERS, you are mandated to pay those costs.
Wow.
Whereas now, we're on the 30-year amortization basis. We can make additional costs as our agency's financial position allows us to do that, but we're not tied into making those costs. And so that is the best that we could do to kind of move this forward without tying our hands and making our structural deficit even worse, because then we would have that unfunded liability payment be even higher, which would then make our structural deficit even worse, if that makes sense, because now you've got this fixed dollar amount that you must meet, and it becomes part of your structure of your financial system. So by being able to say, okay, well, we're going to pay what we have to pay, and then we're going to make the additional stuff as our particular financial position allows, we're still making the proper decisions and we're still making those extra payments when we can, but we haven't forced our hand into being forced into doing that. So it's similar to saying, okay, I have a 30-year mortgage on my house and I can make an extra $500 a month every 3 months. Every third month, I come up with an extra $500 and I can send it in, or I'm going to go with the 15-year mortgage and now my house payment is $500 a month higher because I've shortened the time frame. So it's kind of the same concept of making the payments when you have the financial ability to do so.
Thank you, Shelley. Get it.
Yep. Thank you. All right, is there any other questions? Okay, once again, thank you very much, Shelley, for giving us all a lesson in unfunded liabilities. We
You're welcome.
appreciate it. Okay, we're going to move on to discussion item number 4, which is to consider providing direction to staff regarding the development of cannabis regulations. And I believe the city manager, Kathleen Treppa, you're going to start us off on this item.
That's correct. I'm going to start us off. So we'll have, if Shelley, you can drop your screen. Thank you. There's everybody again. Okay. Yeah, so tonight's, this next item is intended to be a very high level conversation regarding whether or not there's an interest in considering potential commercial cannabis activity here in the city of Winters. And it's intended to be a very high level conversation before doing a lot of staff work. As a result of a letter that was sent into the city by the Downtown Business Association and the Chamber of Commerce, asking that this topic come before the city council so that there could be a community dialogue regarding the question of whether or not there's an interest in some commercial cannabis activity. And so by way of background, I think most people are aware that in November of 2016, California voters passed Proposition 64, and that essentially legalized adult use marijuana, not just medical marijuana that had previously been approved by the state of California. And in response to the passage of Prop 64, the Winters City Council in November of 2017 introduced and adopted an ordinance that basically prohibited outdoor cannabis, outdoor cultivation, and any commercial cannabis activity within the city of Winters. So Prop 64 allows for personal cannabis, personal growing of up to 6 plants for personal use, or a caregiver who is growing up to 6 plants for a patient. That is what's allowed under state law. Otherwise, in accordance with the ordinance that the city council adopted, all commercial cannabis activity is banned within the city of Winters. Subsequent to that action, there is the state law does allow for delivery of cannabis activity into the city of Winters, but there's no commercial cannabis activity that is permitted within the city of Winters. So under state law, current state law, there is a wide array of cannabis activity that could be permitted. There are about 20 different permits that are available under state law, and they typically fall into some major categories. The first one that I've included in the staff report relates to retail activity. It could be a traditional dispensary that is a storefront retail operation, or it could be a non-storefront operation that really exists to provide, to hold inventory and then to support a delivery function. There is manufacturing. There are a series of manufacturing licenses that are available under state law. There is a testing license that is also available under state law, and this goes to testing cannabis products to ensure, components, and is there the presence of pesticides or any chemicals, and it's really to test like any other food or drug, the quality or the components within the product that has been manufactured. There's cultivation as a licensed activity, and then there are micro businesses, which is a vertical integration of three or more or up to 3 permitted activities within an integrated business. There are distributor licenses, and then there are licenses associated with transportation of cannabis products. And so those are the broad range of different permitted activities that are allowed under state law but are currently prohibited here within the city of Winters. Locally, Winters is the only public agency that does not allow some form of cannabis activity. And in the staff report, I included a very brief and simple table. Yolo County allows cultivation of commercial cannabis, but no other activities are allowed by the county. Davis, Woodland, and West Sacramento also allow cannabis activities, but they have chosen different types of activities. Davis, for example, is the only city that allows dispensary or retail activity, but Woodland and West Sacramento do permit other types of cannabis activity. Within Solano and Napa and Colusa County, I did a quick search. This is by no means exhaustive, but of the nearby cities that provide cannabis activity or permit some form of commercial cannabis activity, I also found that Williams, which is a community of under 6,000, allows cannabis, as does Dixon, American Canyon, Benicia, and Sassoon City. So the point of the background is to let you know that there's a wide array of potential cannabis activity that is permitted nearby and in general by various cities, but there are also a number of cities that don't allow it, like Winters, where it's been banned following the passage of Prop 64. In terms of the financial side of commercial cannabis activities, there are different ways that cities obtain revenue from these activities. On the retail side, a dispensary, sort of a broad brush estimate of what a dispensary might produce in the way of revenue for a city is in the range of $250,000 to $350,000. Now, again, that's a very broad brush estimate. The city of Davis has 5 dispensaries, and they expect to receive about $1.5 million in cannabis revenue. Obviously, the circumstances are different from city to city. Winters is a much smaller community. It's surrounded by a more rural area. It doesn't necessarily have the same built-in market that Davis has. But in terms of a broad brush, dispensaries do produce some amount of revenue for cities. And that revenue can be generated through either a sales tax that is approved by, or a business license tax that is approved by the voters. It could be a community benefit agreement that is negotiated between the city and the retailer or the other cannabis activity. Sometimes there is a benefit agreement of 4 to 6% of gross profits that is negotiated with these various businesses through a development agreement, and that revenue is brought forward to the city. So there are different ways that cities obtain revenue through cannabis activities. Part of these businesses, when they come forward and there's a conversation in communities that consider cannabis activity, it's a pretty robust conversation that includes several different components. There's the land use component, which is what type of business is permissible and where would you allow it and how many would you allow? That's the land use component. On the licensing side or the permitting side, this is where the regulations are developed in terms of what's going to be necessary for a business, if allowed, will be regulated. Their applications usually include pretty high deposits to cover the cost of processing those applications, and there is the development of a safety plan that has to be reviewed and approved. There's a strong involvement by the police department and the finance department in these regulations. So safety plans are reviewed and approved. There are physical improvements that must be made to the property. There are a variety of requirements that are imposed on these businesses in the locations where they exist in order to ensure that they are run safely. And how is the payment to the city going to be handled in terms of the financial transactions with the city? So that's the third area, the financial component. So The point of tonight's conversation is to provide at least some high-level information about the types of businesses that might be permitted, the types of areas that would need to be addressed if there was an interest in pursuing some form of commercial cannabis activity in the town. We don't have the staff available to be able to go down this path with the community and with the city council. So given our limited staff resources, we would need to retain the help of a consultant to help us on the land use side and on the financial side. These are typically pretty robust processes in terms of developing the regulations. And so on a very surgical, strategic, focused effort, probably the soonest we might be able to prepare draft regulations, including a pretty comprehensive community engagement process, would be about 6 months. It could be as long as 12 months. The cost for a consultant, just based on some conversations that I've had with staff and other agencies that have run these regulations or consultants themselves, those costs would be at the low end approximately $40,000 and on up to $80,000. And again, that's for a focused effort that doesn't include any environmental review for the regulations. And so currently the state of California waives environmental review for cannabis related activities. That waiver is in place until June 30th of this year. Should the state decide to extend that waiver, which it has done previously, there's the possibilities, should the city want to go down this path, that no environmental review might be necessary, or conversely, it could be that the waiver expires on June 30th, and so an environmental review process would need to take place for any draft regulations, and that would add time and cost to the estimate. In terms of a process, again, tonight is really a high-level conversation prompted by a letter from the Downtown Business Association and the Chamber of Commerce. If there is an interest on the part of the community or on the part of the city council to continue the conversation, we could, as staff, issue a request for proposal to obtain some support from a consultant. We could begin the process and then have check-in points, and at whatever point the city council wanted to either proceed or stop, there'd be no obligation, obviously, to continue. In terms of funding, we do not have, as Shelley has shared with us in her previous reports, we don't have the budget capacity now to absorb the cost of obtaining or securing the services of a consultant. So if there is an interest, the council would need to direct us to prepare for that type of project, and we could build that into next year's budget, and that'll affect. And so now's a good time to have that conversation as we are working on the development of next year's budget. Included in the staff report is one option, should there be an interest, and that is the potential of accepting contributions from interested parties, and primarily I would assume that would be cannabis, the cannabis industry, to help fund the cost of the project. This is similar to developers funding the cost of specific plans. Now, again, this is merely an option. It would only be there'd be no guarantees, obviously, that regulations would be approved. There'd be no guarantee that a permit might be issued to any particular contributor at the end of this process. Obviously, there would need to be distance to ensure that people feel comfortable with that as a concept and as a funding source. It's by no means, it's just one option should there be an interest. And so for the benefit of just the dialogue, it's in there as one option. So again, this is really meant to introduce the topic and to assess whether or not there's any interest in proceeding with exploring commercial cannabis activity as a regulated, permitted activity here in the city of Winter. So that's a very brief overview of the types of permits. It's a pretty complex and complicated subject. So it would take 6 to 12 months and some amount of funding to be able to support the effort. Having said that, one would only go through that exercise if somebody felt that it was worthwhile, that financially on the other side of it, in terms of the amount of revenue that could be potentially derived from permitting these types of activities. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, high level questions, because I'm by no means an expert, but certainly answer any questions.
Okay. Does council have any questions for staff before we open it up for public comment? See what the public's thinking about. Anybody? Okay, well, I think everybody wants to wait and hear what everybody has to say. And before I get to the public comment, I do want to just mention one thing. We have received a lot of emails on this topic for tonight. And Ashley has compiled those, and I know all the council members have been sent these letters. And our city clerk, Ashley, is, before we open up for the verbal public comment, she's just gonna go through them real quickly and give us a little rundown on, just a name and whether they were for it or against it. It's just a little bit on a feel for what we were getting email wise. Ashley?
Hi, and I am writing down names as I see your hands popping up to make sure we don't miss anybody when we open it. I received 11 written comments submitted by email between yesterday and today. I'm going to read into record a summary of all written comments that were submitted. Comments will not be read verbatim due to time restrictions, but if you are interested in reading the submitted comments, they are posted on the city's website. You can go to the city council meeting page at cityofwinters.org, and we have compiled those into a PDF packet, and the entire email is available there. So to start off with the 11, first was Sarah Shirley, a resident of the city of Winters who supports cannabis operations in the city. Sarah stated that having a dispensary in town would create jobs and allow people to spend their money in Winters, generating tax revenue. Chelsea Swan, a resident of the city of Winters, speaking on behalf of the Swan family, opposes cannabis operations in the city. Chelsea stated that the sense of community would be lost when cannabis clubs come into town due to their big city energy. The Swan family would like the city to help the businesses that are already here instead of putting resources into new projects. Deborah D'Angelo, a resident of the city of Winters, supports cannabis operations in the city. Deborah's support is based on personal experience with medical marijuana. Deborah stated that it has been an effective tool to cope with chronic conditions. She also stated that Winters residents are going out of town for their medical cannabis, causing the city to lose out on tax revenue. Casey Scott, a resident of the city of Winters, supports cannabis operations. Casey wrote in and said that this would be an opportunity for our community to create jobs, generate revenue, and set an example on how to safely venture into this rapidly growing industry. Nancy Hannell, a resident of the city of Winters, supports cannabis operations. Nancy stated that this could generate tax revenue and help local shops and restaurants that have been impacted by COVID-19. Crystal Enriquez, a resident of the city of Winters, supports cannabis operations in the city. Crystal stated that the money spent by residents on cannabis in other towns should be spent in Winters so that the city can reap the benefits. Crystal also stated that revenue brought in by cannabis can help the city have more money to put towards recreation for community members. Audrey Krebs, a resident of the city of Winters, supports cannabis operations. Audrey stated that we are losing tax dollars and this would improve the community by creating jobs and help with tax revenue. Brooke Lee, a resident of the city of Winters, supports cannabis operations in the city. Brooke also believes that it will bring in much needed revenue. Ryan Catanzaro, a resident of the city of Winters, supports cannabis operations in the city. Ryan stated that the city would benefit from tax revenue and the elderly community would also benefit by not having to commute out of town for their treatments. Marianne Boyer, a resident of the city of Winters, supports cannabis operations in the city. And lastly, Jimmy Green, a resident of the city of Winters, speaking on behalf of the Green family, supports cannabis operations in the city. The Green family believes Winters is becoming a destination for vacation and local getaways from the Bay Area. Cannabis tourism is on the rise, and having retail in the city would provide additional opportunities for travelers. And that is the 11 emails that I received.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashley. We will now go to the public comments, and please remember to keep your comments to 3 minutes. And Ashley, fire it well.
Okay, so we started with the first person who had their hand up was Treya. I don't know. There's not a full name there, but you know who you are.
Yeah, yes, thank you. My name is Rob Reed. Excuse me. I'm one of the owners of F Street Dispensary in Davis, and wanted to thank the city council and the city staff for taking up this important topic, one that we have great interest in. My brother Mike and I are the sole owners of F Street Dispensary, and Mike is actually a resident of Winters who really enjoys living there and was excited to hear that this is a topic you are taking up. Before the city of Davis actually approved any ordinance, we were helping the city, and they asked us to look at what other college towns did in terms of an ordinance to launch potentially cannabis businesses in Davis. So we commissioned a white paper, as well as worked with staff as we could, and were asked to help provide information about cannabis. I'd be happy to share that white paper with anyone who has interest. F Street Dispensary has now been open 2 years. Things are going well, and we're one of the busier stores in Davis. We actually have quite a clientele of Winters residents, and we have some information that we'd be happy to share with the city council and the city. Of course, we wouldn't provide any patient names or purchase history, but we could look at some of that information as a whole for you guys to get a sense of what sales might be if indeed you were to open up for retail establishments. We're here to be a resource. Naturally, we have some interest in seeing what kind of ordinance may be introduced and put into place if it ends up happening that way. But even as you have initial discussions of what an ordinance could be, more specifically, we can help with providing tours of F Street Dispensary, talking about what it takes to operate a store, and provide information and context around the retail environment. So again, we want to thank everyone for taking the time this evening and for looking into things around cannabis businesses. We'll be following this closely, and again, are here to help. I'll go ahead and reach out to city staff as well as city council members with our contact information, should any of you like to have a conversation about it. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you very much, Rob. Next, Ashley. Are you still there, Ashley?
No. Is she muted?
If she is, she asked me to unmute. It might be my opportunity to speak.
Okay, go ahead. State your name and
My name's Taylor Bewley. I'm
There
a
you
resident
go.
here at 210 Ammon. I'm also the publisher and one of the small-time owners of the Winters Express. We're the local media publisher in town. I just wanted to applaud the council for taking this on. I think it's great that you guys are approaching this with an open mind. I want to thank you for listening to the business community. I think it's been clear through recent actions that you guys are listening, and the prompt action on the letter, I think, is the latest example of that. The last year has been fantastic. You guys continue to be extremely responsive, and I just wanted to take a moment to express some gratitude for that. But I also wanted to say that if we explore this idea, I hope you click the button because you need me to be on a timer. But I just wanted to encourage you to take on this idea. If we're going to do it, just explore it in its entirety. I know there's a developer in town who's working on an innovation center, for example, related to cannabis. And we're talking about a multi-million-dollar development, bringing together multi-million-dollar businesses to do multi-million dollars in intra-business sales. And so I don't want this conversation to be limited to just a dispensary on Main Street, although I love the idea of a dispensary on Railroad or whatever it is that comes by. I just got a text message about the paper being finished printing, and I think that's really cool. I own it. I live in town. My property taxes contribute to the budget. My editors live in town. My writers live in town. We're the biggest postal customer. It's not just about having a product for sale. It's about the whole economy that goes with it. I'm drinking a Berryessa Pilsner. That Berryessa Pilsner was bought from Lorenzo's. It was delivered by a local delivery person who started their day in a truck at the brewery. I know the truck's really happy. That truck bought gas in town. That person probably lives in town, and they bought my paper probably. And so it's not just about that beer for sale, it's about the whole economy that goes with it. And so as we approach this idea, I love this idea, and I just hope you guys approach the whole economy of it, because there's a lot of great work that's been done to establish what can be done along these lines. And I just want to build upon a great history of Winters looking at the economic opportunities around agriculture to bring together what could be more than just a dispensary on Main Street. So this is my favorite time of year. I'm here for the budget meeting, but I get like a 1-2 punch because I get to talk about cannabis too. It's clear that TOT taxes are not the panacea, okay? It's clear that even with the operating months that we had, that it wouldn't have met expectations anyway, even knowing that it's a time lagged indicator and we're gonna be going through a continued recovery. This is not the recovery that was property tax related. This is not 2007. This is completely different. And this is wholly focused on sales and sales taxes. And I just love the context of today's budget discussion, which clearly suggests that the city has cash flow issues. You have to be frank. The city has cash flow issues. Shelley is very clear about it not just being about one time in new developments that are going to bring one-time infusions of cash, but about ongoing. And I just want to drive it back to that whole economy of change and that opportunity there. I'm not here to advocate for you guys to open up. We have Rob on the line, and Rob is one of my customers. I'm not going to speak on his behalf. We have a lot of customers, and Winters customers are finding their products for sale in other places, and those businesses are doing a fantastic job serving our community. But I wanted to bring up 3 things. So the first thing I wanted to bring up is that I'd like you to approach this with the consideration similar to the idea of form-based code, that it's not just like we want to zone this certain area, this square, 4 square feet for cannabis sales, but sort of to come up with a description of what it is that you're trying to achieve from this idea. And I think that you have to think about it from an industry perspective and also from a retail perspective. I think it would be a fantastic complement to downtown. I think that you can envision a very high class establishment. And I think from a form idea, as we see in planning development, switch to a form-based code, that may be a good way to approach this cannabis. The second of 3 things I want to encourage is that you guys go easy on these guys, okay? These are not just businesses bringing sales tax. These are vital members of our community who go way above and beyond the normal business to be a part of it. So Rob is a great example who does charity events, who's just a great member of the chamber. I mean, he's just a vital part of the chamber. And it's not just about another business providing sales tax. It's about, these guys are people. And it's great that he's willing to do some of the legwork, but I don't love the idea of making them pay to do some of the background investigation. I think we should go easy on these guys. And to that extent, just know that the problem is not these guys. When you hear about problems in the cannabis industry, it's people who don't pay taxes, who don't pull a business license, and they're operating in the business community already. They're doing delivery services. They're on Weed Maps. You can pull it up. You can check it out. So these guys are the good guys. These guys are the best that we have. So the final thing I want to do is there's going to be a lot of arguments.
Quickly, Taylor.
Yes, sir.
Quickly, please.
Yes, sir. The final point is that you're going to hear a lot of arguments of why tax is a good reason to do this. And I want to encourage you to think potentially in the other direction, is that you could collect a lot of tax and get a little bit of business, but you could potentially collect a lot less tax and get even more total revenue overall. We don't have a first mover advantage, but we have a last mover advantage in which we can look at all the tax brackets and all the different competing communities and come up with a tax that's appropriate and makes Winters a valid competitive option for any businesses that choose to open up. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Taylor. Ashley, next.
I am back. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I lost control. My mouse died. Gotta love doing things on the computer. So next we had, is it Nara?
Oh, she's muted.
Oh, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi there, Nara. I'm a resident over in Lake County, so just a little bit to your east. And I work for a small company that does licensing and government affairs for cannabis industry. And I also do compliance and the track and trace system. And I do want to echo what the previous speaker did just say, that the people that are going to come in and apply to be a business in Winters, those are going to be the folks you want to be working with. And in 2016, when the city decided to ban cannabis, the only thing you guys did was stop cannabis from being purchased in Winters, and you stopped yourselves from making money on it. So I think there are opportunities. We've worked with a lot of cities to help them develop ordinances and work with a lot of people to put really good businesses and appropriate businesses in the town. And I think you kind of hear that in even the negative comments today that they're worried about and stuff like that. And that's not what cannabis has to be. Cannabis is being used by your neighbors, your parents, your your brothers and sisters. There's really nothing to be afraid of here. You can, however, stage it if you chose to. So you could choose not to go right into a storefront retail. You could do a non-storefront retail and have deliveries. That what I will say is that the tax issue is a big one, and I've taken pretty big companies out of cities that had uncompetitive tax rates because it just doesn't work. Cannabis is a very thin margin business right now, particularly the supply chain. So even when you have high gross receipts, you're not going to be able to support taxes that are anything over like 4 and 5%. West Sac has a distribution tax, I think, of 1%. And they're competitive and they're pulling businesses from surrounding communities. So I would definitely encourage you to stick with the low taxes. You can pick and choose among the businesses. If you do a supply chain business, it can be a high revenue business without it being without you having to do the high taxes and tax a business and chase them away. You can still get a pretty good return with a low tax. And again, you have a more competitive area, and you can show people, and you can choose the better businesses. A resource for to answer any questions, and I'm really pleased to see that Winters is considering cannabis. I've spent a lot of time and a lot of money there. One of my best friends lives in town, yeah, I would be happy to frequent any cannabis operation that you all have. So thanks for your time.
Thank you. Ashley, next.
We had Denise next.
Good evening. This is not actually Denise. Albert Viacio on Denise's computer. She's here next to me, but I'm speaking in support of exploring the cannabis industry, businesses in town, particularly retail and testing and development of cannabis industry. The pandemic has exposed our economy, sort of dependency on one type of economic activity that sort of kind of caused problems for our tax base. But I believe in expanding into the cannabis industry would provide a more varied income base for the city through tax revenue and through creating jobs. And I'd like to offer what the city of Calusa is doing, just, 1 hour away up Highway 5. Calusa, working with grants, working through their city manager. They are building what they call an accelerator, where they're taking a 240,000 square foot building that's been shuttered for 20 years to develop the ability to do research and to develop new products. It started with cannabis and hemp, but that whole idea is expanded to agricultural byproducts. So, and they're doing this as a city with the help of some grant writers. And I was involved in it as a construction professional in that project. And cannabis isn't too different from what we depend on now, which is an alcohol-based economy, with all the restaurants and wineries and different things in restaurants. And I believe by attracting this business to our community, we would create jobs, and we would capture those tax dollars that, as previous speakers have said, are leaving town. And I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Al. Ashley, next.
I am not seeing anyone with their hand up. I'm not seeing anybody else at this time.
Well, maybe we can encourage at least one to raise their hand. I saw Chris Turkovich is on the Zoom meeting tonight, and as the signer of the letter that came to the city that sparked this, I'm sure some of us would like to hear Chris's thoughts on this topic. Chris, would you be willing to say a few words?
Yeah. Yeah, basically it's we recognize it's a complicated topic with lots of there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes along with this. We felt from a business community that this was not something that should be just discussed within the business community. This is a community-wide discussion, which is why we brought it. I want to make sure it was brought to the public and through the city council. And yeah, I think that there's some benefits. There's definitely some issues to work through, or some details. And as far as some of the things that were discussed earlier, if there is going to be a retail component, we do believe that downtown is a good spot for that, due to the things like the form-based code, the foot traffic. It would help the downtown, but we also don't think this should be exclusively a retail discussion. As far as the community goes, some of these things like testing, manufacturing, or distribution could benefit the city a lot. And so even outside the downtown, there's some other avenues of the industry that we should explore. But basically, we just encourage this process, and from the downtown, we support kind of the community discussion, and no matter what comes of it, we're in support of that finding.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate the comments. Ashley, anybody else poke a hand up?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Is there any discussion or questions from the council members? I can't see everybody, so speak up.
Sure. I'll speak up.
Okay, go ahead.
So, yeah, I attended a conference a little while, about a year and a half ago, whenever we were meeting in person. And I met some council members from Nevada City, and Nevada City had just done several things. They did a cannabis adoption, but they did several businesses. So they wanted a request that had retail, but also manufacturing, and maybe multiple manufacturing and distribution, so that they weren't going to attract one business. They were going to attract 5 or 6 businesses. And I find that idea very attractive. What I learned, this is a weird segue here, but bear with me. working with Chief Miller, I've learned a lot about what the police department has as like a force multiplier. And I like to transfer that knowledge to having a more of an economic multiplier. And I think that if we're going to go in this direction, that we go kind of big, in that we would look at having jobs in industry and distribution, manufacturing, and retail. I personally, when I've looked into in my own, off council time, the cultivation aspect in Yolo County, and my understanding, and there might be somebody that's on here that knows a lot more than I do on this, but my understanding is that Yolo County has a very robust track and trace program, very robust cultivation program, and if that is already in place in the county, I don't see any reason why we would have a heavy lift and include that in our city. Also, being a 2.9 square mile city, we're just a little too small, I think, for any kind of cultivation in town. I just I don't see any reason to support that. I guess I'll wait for further comment.
Okay, thank you. Is Chief Miller still on the meeting? Would you be willing to,
And
chime
then we
in here a
also
little bit?
have a member of the public with their hand up, Jeff. Is it Buckman?
Yes.
Okay. We'll let Chief Miller go first, and then we'll hear from Jeff.
And sir, specifically, what would you like me to speak to?
Just the police department's take on, your feelings about whether or not Winters would go down this road of entertaining the cannabis business in town.
Well, to reiterate what the city manager said, it is a very complex issue. A lot of things need to be considered. As I've talked to other police chiefs that have it in their jurisdictions, they've made it abundantly clear to definitely be on the ground level when it comes to the forming of the regulations. The police department is legal in California. I don't see any different than tobacco or alcohol. I do believe it needs to be regulated, taxed, licensed. Certainly there's concerns about DUID, that's driving under the influence of drugs, but it comes with any bar or any liquor store also in town. So it, I guess just to reiterate, as long, I definitely caution the council to go down the road cautiously, keeping all options open, and again reiterate support the city manager's position.
Okay, thank you very much, Chief. Jeff Buckman, go ahead.
Thank you. So I have to first commend the city for taking a look at this and exploring it to the community as well as among the business leaders. But as a person who works in the packaging industry, the largest growth segment of my business in the last 5 years has come from the cannabis business. If I didn't have that, I would be unemployed right now. And it's really nice to see that the opportunity is in front of us to explore this, because there is revenue to be made, and that is vital to the city. And even though it's not going to be on the table, there's not going to be revenue probably for greater than 12 months if this is approved and a program is put in place. But it's nice to see that the entities within the community are looking at it. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, back to council input. Pierre, go ahead.
First up, I'd just like to thank people that either sent emails, letters, or took time to tune in tonight and give us their input. And I'm impressed that all these people that have done that have taken time to do this. And I'd like them to make sure that they talk to other people in the community. because I think that what I heard tonight and what I've heard previously also, it's certainly worth exploring. I think that there are, I know that there are some people that just don't want to have anything to do with it, but I think that it is an avenue that we should look at, and that the community should talk about amongst themselves. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Biazzi.
Thank you, Mayor. Sure. Yeah, I have several thoughts on this. I've been going back and forth with it. I remember when we had the discussion back in 2017 regarding the ordinance that we ultimately approved as far as the growing cannabis in the city and that type of thing. I'm number one of my questions is for the police department, is what would the impacts of policing this be? This is a type of industry who is dependent on cash sales, so there's a lot of cash being moved around. Does that mean that we're going to need to police it more closely? And is that going to, put an impact on our police department? One of the concerns I brought up previously back in 2017 is that even though cannabis is legal statewide, it is still classified federally as a Schedule I drug. So it is still illegal federally, which I find it hard to believe that, this number of states that do have legalized marijuana, yet it can still be classified as a drug, an illegal drug federally. So that's kind of contradicting there. So I'm torn, which way to go on that part of it. But, I know this is potentially a source of revenue, but that source of revenue, as we know, it's not guaranteed. There's an estimate of 250,000 per dispensary in Davis, but we look at Davis has a much different population than Winters has. They have a young college community as well as a lot more people there. I mean, the only retail dispensary in Yolo County are the ones that are in Davis. So that's, Woodland, even though they've allowed other forms of cannabis manufacturing, whatever the processes might be, none of them have opened up dispensaries, approved retail sales. I'm also concerned, based on all of the financial information brought to us earlier tonight from our financial director. I mean, we're looking at spending potentially $40,000 to $80,000 on hiring a consultant. I know we're putting together numbers for the budget that will be starting in our next fiscal year this summer, and trying to squeeze another $80,000 into that budget when we're already spending down our reserves for the last, I believe, 10 years. We've been spending down our reserves, and then we're going to try to squeeze another $80,000 out of there that have to come from somewhere. And there's no guarantee, these tax revenues, even if we went down the path and said, yeah, let's hire a consultant, we could spend $80,000 and then no business wants to come and open up in Winters. We could be stuck with that bill, and it might be years before, it sounds like we could easily make back $80,000 in a year, but I don't know if that's the case or not. I would have to have a lot more information before I wanted to agree with putting money like that forward. I worry about what it would do to basically the fabric of our community, and what, is that going to change what our community is like if we would not only be a place for local residents of our community to go and purchase cannabis, but it's also going to draw people from surrounding areas. And as one of the speakers talked about earlier, if we put too high of a tax on it, sales aren't going to be very high. If we have a low tax and our sales aren't that high, we're not going to bring in that much revenue. I know those are things that need to be fleshed out probably by a consultant. So land use issues, the question of whether the environmental review is still going to be waived again, which we don't know. It just seems like, this is definitely an interesting topic I'd like to look into more, but I don't know if this is the proper time to do it. I would like to potentially say, let's get some more community input. I know we've heard from quite a few people tonight in support of it. I've heard from a few people who didn't write letters, but they were opposed to it. And I remember, when I was running for council again back in 2020, a number of people that I spoke to asked about it, and there were several of them who were opposed to that type of industry coming to town. So, you know, we're hearing a lot of people in favor of it tonight, but I think there's also part of our community that's out there. So I mean, maybe doing a survey to better assess what the community actually wants regarding this might be a way to go without us having to spend too much money. I'm not sure what it would take to put together some type of online survey. We have some new software programs that have those tools in them. I don't know if those are operational at this point, but those are kind of some of my thoughts on it at this point.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Anderson, you have any thoughts on the topic? Unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, thank you. One thought that keeps coming back to me is when the city passed the ordinance prohibiting things within the city. I think about the people who were complaining because people were growing marijuana in their backyards or etc. And the odors given off by marijuana when you grow it are pretty potent, I'm told. And I just don't want to inflict that on anyone if I don't have to.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I think this is, something that the city's definitely, needs to look at and carefully consider. And there's a lot to consider and to think about here. And the city manager did give us, some options here and some assistance with facilitating this discussion and whether we're interested and would the council like additional community input. And I do agree with the mayor pro tem. I think step one, let's do an online survey. It seems, like from the input we've gotten from emails and from comments tonight, I'm seeing just a couple of people adamantly against, and the majority seem to be for moving forward with exploring this possibility. Personally, it's not something I feel completely necessary just because I'm not a regular user, but at the same time, everybody can do what they feel they want to do legally. And I have no problem with, if we ended up coming up with regulation and having a business in town, I'd be okay with that. I probably would never buy anything there, but I'd be okay with it. And it is something to consider, the financial part of it. Some of the things that I'd want to learn more about is there's some numbers in the report that the city manager put together about possible income from some of these type of facilities. And, I'd like to drill down in those numbers a little bit about once you subtract the costs to provide those services, what's the net income out of that type of business. I do know that, Yolo County's probably done a better job than most other areas at regulating this as far as, I've actually toured one of the growing facilities and was very impressed by the level of security, the level of control that the county had over literally every plant, having its own barcode and being traced on a constant basis. So, they are doing a pretty good job of controlling it and keeping up with all of that. So I think it's, worth exploring. Do we have the money to do it right now? No. Thanks to COVID, we don't have the money to do much of anything. But I think it's, it doesn't take much of anything to do a survey and get as much public input as possible, because, even though I might not personally be a user and a supporter of it, if the majority of the community is, and it helps us with our finances, then I would lean towards going along with opening, some form of this industry within Winters. But there's, as stated, there's a lot to it. And I think I have no problem with us, starting down this road. And I think step one, as mentioned by the Mayor Pro Tem, is let's do a survey. Let's get as much input from the community as we can. And let's look a little harder at what it would take financially, possibly in the next budget year, to get a consultant. It wouldn't cost us anything to get some proposals. And I think we had a couple of people tonight, Rob from Davis, and we had, I think it was Nara from Lake County. There was, and Jeff as well, that all have different pieces of this pie, so to speak, and seem to have a lot of knowledge and willing to share it. It would be nice to get a little more information from them and do a request for proposals and do a survey, and then revisit this again before our next budget cycle starts. That's my thoughts.
Mr. Mayor, would you like, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
Councilmember Lauren, go ahead.
I'll wait.
No, go
Okay.
ahead. I'll wait until all the council comments are done, and then I can follow up.
Well, I want to thank the community, everybody who's on, and all the people who have written letters and who have, come out to talk about this. I like Wade. I'm not a user. I wouldn't necessarily frequent a store if it was in Winters, but I think that there's a couple things that we brought up tonight that we need to kind of rethink. And that one is that we do have a structural deficit. When COVID hit, what it did to the city of Winters, it did to many businesses, is it shined a light on where the cracks are. And we know that financially we have to make a more robust financial decisions to plan for our future, not just paying down our unfunded liabilities for PERS, but in our own finances. Before I lose you on the financial part, another one of the comments was that it's going to take 4 or 5 years for us to recover, and maybe less time depending on some of the decisions that we would make tonight. I am open to us having more of a discovery. Maybe that is what Mayor Pro Tem Bill said, having a survey in the community. But I'm also interested in giving direction. I think listening to the comments from Harold doesn't want. Harold mentioned that he thinks that people had a lot to say about the smell of a grow. And I think if we can take anything off the table, it might be having a grow in town, leaving cultivation to the county. The county does an excellent job. So maybe we don't have to worry about that or spend resources on it. But I think there's a lot of interest in retail distribution, testing and manufacturing. And there are questions that I have. If there's how many employees does a retail establishment have? How many, how many salespeople, how much security, how much, there's a lot of unknowns, but I think the only way that we're going to know more is to explore more. And some of the other questions that we're being asked tonight, besides what activities, is would council consider allowing cannabis industry contributions to fund the development of those regulations, or instead direct staff to include a budget of 80,000 in next year's budget? What I think I heard Mayor Cowan say is that he's willing to look at that as part of the budget. But I'm not sure that I heard everything on that. So, I want clarification on some of our conversation. Are we directing staff? And I would be okay with directing staff to include that in the budget. But I just want to make sure we're more clear. I don't think that it's enough to just say that we want to explore something and we might do a survey. And I don't think I think we need to do more tonight.
Well, to try to clarify what I said, I'm good with the survey, and I'd like to see us do an RFP, for proposals for a consultant, so that we can get a more accurate, rather than a $40,000 to $80,000 range. We'll see what the prices, really are in today's world to do this, and then revisit this prior to finalizing our next budget.
Okay, just to be clear. So if we are directing staff, we're saying that we're interested in finding out more. We're interested in an RFP for a consultant. And then what staff has asked us to do also is of that list to kind of narrow down, to narrow down the list. Does anybody else have an opinion on that tonight? My opinion on that is retail distribution, testing, and maybe manufacturing, but not grow. Are we?
Yeah, I would not
including that?
support. I would not support. I agree with that. I would not support growing within the city limits. That's a farming operation that can stay out in the county and the farms. And the rest, the pieces, the retail and the distribution and the testing, I think those are things that could be looked at and considered with some help. And I'd like to see what that help would cost. And I do still have share the concern that the Mayor Pro Tem brought up about, the federal law. This would all be a lot easier for everybody if it wasn't against federal law. And that's because that's what turns it into a cash operation versus being able to have a banking account like a normal business. So that is a consideration, because that's what adds to the security of it and their ability to function as a quote normal business. So, and that all gets brought out and talked about with the process. I'm just saying I'm not opposed to starting the process. Councilmember New.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that tonight what we're doing is just talking about the situation and possibly bringing in cannabis, but I don't think we should limit ourselves by what we say this evening. I think that we need to get all the information out on the table that we can, and then make our decisions as to what we want to do. I'm in agreement on the survey, and I think anything that we can do to bring in more information is what we want to do. I don't think that we should start limiting things tonight. And I too am not really in favor of growing in town. I can't even see how that would work, but I just don't think that we should throw anything off the table tonight. Just leave it open and start from there.
Councilmember New, may I address you? it was my understanding that, that City Manager Kathleen Treppa was asking us to narrow the scope in the high level discussion. And I might have misunderstood that, and maybe she can clarify that for us.
That would be fine.
Yeah, so I put that in the staff report if there seemed to be concurrence. If there isn't, that's fine. Eliminating one of the possible 6 different types of permit activities, I think it's fine. So in response to some of the comments that have been made and the desire for more information, there are things that that we can do. I can take a little bit more time and do and aggregate some more information related to not only which cities have these, but the type of revenue that seems to be generated. There are plenty of sample RFPs that are out there that have been issued by other cities in terms of securing consulting support to help with this process. So I can take a little bit of time to pull some more information together. Mayor Pro Tem Biasi is correct. We do have a new platform that we are working on in phases. One of those modules is, well, there are 2 modules. One is called Storyboard and the other is Survey. And it allows us to present information through the storyboarding component. So it's not just a straight survey, there's information. Then there's the survey portion that goes with that. So it's also a way to, it's not like SurveyMonkey where you can vote multiple times on something. It does track the address so that you can only participate in the survey once. We can develop some of that information. Other agencies have used those same tools to create surveys and storyboards as part of engaging the community on this topic. And so some more of that information will be available through the platform. So we can prepare an outreach component, do some surveying, and we can begin to compile more detailed information on these various topics, along with crafting an RFP to get some consulting support. And if I were to craft that RFP, I would have thresholds for check-in so that if the first task or deliverable would be some additional outreach to the community to better assess community interest, that would be the first deliverable of any proposal. But we can do a little bit more work before we actually incur any significant expense, and it will also help inform what we would budget for should the council want to proceed.
Okay,
Another question.
go ahead.
So for the city manager, in order to do the RFP, do you need to have more specific direction on which of the different types of areas we want to go into?
Yes and no. I mean, if there was a real specific desire that was clear, and then we were only going to focus on one particular area or 2, then that's what we would write the RFP for. I think what would happen in this case is that all options are still on the table, and that part of developing the regulations would be to provide more information up front so that before we drill down and actually develop those regulations, there's an assessment as to where interest truly lies. I'm hearing some hesitancy about cultivation. And maybe then that becomes one of the first things that's decided as to whether or not there's an interest or not, just based on the size of the community and the fact that agricultural enterprises are in the county unincorporated area. But we would craft something where we would try and be strategic and leverage the consulting support and not spend money needlessly on something that ultimately isn't supported. That would be obviously the goal.
I could see where the cultivation part of it, we could explore that. And if we were to possibly look at it, it would be limited to say indoor only with, and there's a number, I think, of filtration systems that would be required. So you're not getting that smell into the community. Maybe we have something like that out in more of an industrial area, not, down in the corner. There's all those the buildings that Mary Annie's have, these concrete buildings, these huge warehouses that who knows, someday Mary Annie's move out of there and those buildings are empty. Those might be places, but whether we want that in that area of town, those are all things that would have to be explored. But I don't know if you'd want to leave that out completely at this point. We want to look at that in other areas, but yeah, I'd like to see if we are going to explore it, When it comes back to one of the other issues on the cash part of it, because of the federal regulations, one of the discussions that I had with the owners of the F Street dispensary in Davis a couple weeks ago, they contacted me. And there is a way apparently for one of these businesses to set up a bank account. There are certain banks, and they had all kinds of information on how they could set that up. And then I believe they said like debit cards could be used, something like that. So it doesn't have to be an all cash business. I know a lot of it probably is cash, but there are some ways to work around that. So there's a lot of information that would need to be collected to actually do this and do it right. So I think it's going to cost us a lot of money to actually do that. And it's comes back to the thing, well, in order to do that, you might have to spend some money in order to make money in the long term. But just my concern is if this is the right time to spend that money, or is it in the next budget cycle? I'm not sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think I'd like some more information on it, dig down a little bit more before I made that decision as to whether, we should do it in the next budget cycle or not, get some answers to some of the questions that the Mayor Pro Tem just brought up. And I think, doing an RFP and kind of looking a little more carefully at what those costs would be and gathering a little more information. And I wouldn't be at all opposed to having some more in-depth information from some of the speakers tonight that are actually, as far as I'm concerned, professionals in this business. Like I say, I know some of us have toured one of the cultivation facilities outside of town. The Mayor Pro Tem's been to the dispensary up in Davis. I'd like to personally, over the next few weeks, be able to, get some more answers for myself, and would encourage the rest of the council and some of the staff to do the same, so that we can better educate ourselves on the topic before we make any final decisions on it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to invite Nara or Rob Reed to maybe contact the council on. There are things that, I've done some research, but I don't know what is the cutting edge of industry and, the benefits or drawbacks. I can tell you that I don't know all the different levels of manufacturing. But I do know that the city of Winters does need revenue, and we have to have that revenue match our community. So I would just ask you if there's maybe links or some information that you can share. We're trying to make decisions that benefit our community, but it feels a little bit like building the plane while flying it tonight. And we need help. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
So from my perspective, I've heard direction about exploring and gathering more information, both technical information with regard to the industry. And I agree, I could also use some assistance from the people who actually work within the industry. So I'd appreciate if they would contact me separately so that we can start that dialogue, but also some input from the community. And I'll pull together some things and develop a framework for how we might move this forward in the next the next couple months, so that as we approach budget decisions, there's an opportunity to revisit this with more information. And at that point, we can have more specific direction with regard to the budget, at least.
Okay. I think that's a good idea. Thank you.
Yeah, I just have one more thing, and that is I want to thank the business community, especially for writing the letter. It is the business community that reached out to the city of Winters, not the other way around. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Bill.
for sure.
Bill, I think we had our hand up at the same time. Go ahead.
Yep.
It was just a comment. One of the questions that city manager had posed to us was how we felt on accepting contributions from the industry to go towards possibly a consultant. And personally, I don't like going down that road at this point. I don't think taking money from that industry to, even though we could put stipulations on it, that, doesn't mean that they would have any first preference at getting a license or getting approval. I would like to see us go, if we're going to do it on our own, not with industry money.
I agree with that. But I would like to, as stated, get some assistance from, and some of the folks we've heard from tonight, as well as others, about helping to educate us and, being able to tour some facilities and things like that they can do to help us learn a little more about the process and how it's handled would be extremely helpful. But I do agree with your assessment on using their money. Mayor, or not Mayor, Council Member New.
Thank you. Not that I ever want to disagree with Bill, but I raised this question earlier today with Kathleen in our meeting this morning. What would happen if we were able to draw money from several sources in the industry so that nobody had real ties? And I may be dreaming, but maybe I'm not. But I was thinking that if we needed $40,000 and there were 4 people that were interested in putting business here in town, and they were willing to put up 10,000 apiece, that sort of means that we don't have a tie into anybody, but we've maybe secured some money. So I just want to leave that on the table. Whether it is dreaming or not, I don't know. But yes, I would be a little dubious about taking money from one person and having that look like they're buying their way in. So that's my comment on that subject.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Anderson. Go ahead, Harold.
Thank you, Mayor. One thing I think would be helpful, and I don't know how you collect this, but as mentioned, I think West Sacramento was given as an example where they're going to less tax, and that generating that being a generator of its own right without being so heavy-handed on one particular business.
Got it.
Thank you.
You bet. All right. I think we've sufficiently beat the horse. Councilmember Lauren.
One more.
You know what? I just want to say that what I've learned in life on this is that the discomfort of where you are has to be great enough for you to risk and change for the discomfort of what you will move into. And that is true for education, for running for office, for many things. And I would just like to encourage council to be bold and get informed, but be bold. And I think that we have a structural deficit. We have financial need. We also have a business opportunity, or many that are thriving. And we need to move forward in the city of Winners. And we've embraced all kinds of new software and finance changes, software oriented. But now we have to look closely. And so I just want to encourage council to be bold. And thank you.
Okay. You got the last word. All right, we're gonna move on. Kathleen, city manager's report.
I have none following that discussion. Thank you.
Okay, well, with that said, then we're gonna close the meeting at 8:49. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.